My name is Rebecca Mitchell, 32, and last year at my cousin's wedding reception, I overheard my parents talking with my brother. In our eyes, she's already dead, my father said coldly, referring to me. My mother nodded in agreement. The son they'd always favored just smirked. They didn't know I was standing behind the decorative screen, champagne glass frozen midair. 12 months later, I'm throwing a party at my new vineyard estate, purchased with the family inheritance they never suspected existed. Sometimes the dead come back to claim what's rightfully theirs. I still remember that moment so vividly, like it happened yesterday instead of a year ago. Before I share how I rose from the dead to reclaim my life and dignity, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. This story about family betrayal and unexpected justice might resonate differently depending on your own experiences. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, hit that like button, you're definitely not alone. Now, let's dive into how I went from the perfect daughter to someone my parents wished didn't exist. For over 30 years, I exhausted myself trying to be the perfect daughter. Every morning, I'd wake up wondering what I could do to finally earn my parents' approval. It started early. I was reading before kindergarten, playing piano by 7, and by high school, I was juggling advanced placement classes while volunteering at the hospital where my mother worked as an administrator. I graduated as valedictorian with a full scholarship to Cornell, something my parents acknowledged with a nod and an as expected. Rebecca always performs well academically, my father told relatives at my graduation party, his tone suggesting this was the bare minimum. Meanwhile, my brother Kevin was celebrated for passing with C's, my parents throwing him a separate party that overshadowed mine. When it came time to choose my college major, I wanted to pursue music. I'd been playing piano since I was young, even winning state competitions. But I can still hear my father's dismissive laugh. Music won't pay the bills, Rebecca. Business is practical. Music is a hobby. So I majored in business and accounting, shelving my dreams to satisfy his vision for my life. After college, I dutifully joined the family accounting firm, Mitchell Financial Services. My father had inherited it from his father, and it was understood that I would work there until my brother Kevin was ready to take over. Never mind that Kevin had dropped out of college after 3 semesters or that he could barely balance his own checkbook. He was the son, the rightful heir in my father's eyes. While I built client relationships and expanded our business by 30% in 5 years, Kevin launched one failed venture after another. There was the sports bar that closed within 6 months, the car detailing service that never got off the ground, and the cryptocurrency investment that mysteriously disappeared. Each time, my parents bailed him out, often using company funds I had worked hard to generate. Family supports family, my mother would say whenever I questioned these decisions. What she really meant was that Kevin deserved support, I was just expected to give it. I recall the weekend of my state piano competition in high school. I had practiced for months, sacrificing weekends and sleep. The morning of the competition, my parents promised they'd be there, but at the last minute, they decided to attend Kevin's baseball game instead. He wasn't even a starter, he mostly sat on the bench. But when I won first place, there was no one in the audience to celebrate with me. When I got home with my trophy, my father barely looked up from his newspaper. "That's expected, not exceptional, Rebecca," he said, while my mother nodded in agreement. "Kevin hit the game-winning run today." "That's exceptional." It wasn't true. I later learned from Kevin himself that he hadn't even played that day. But the pattern was clear, my achievements were dismissed while his were exaggerated or invented outright. Last year, when my parents decided to downsize their home, I offered to help them pack. While sorting through old files in my father's study, I found a folder that changed everything. Inside were adoption papers, my adoption papers. I was adopted as an infant from family friends who had died in a car accident. My parents had never told me. Suddenly, everything made sense, why I didn't look like either of my parents, why there were no baby photos of me before 6 months, why I was treated differently from Kevin. He was their biological child, I was not. It was as simple and as heartbreaking as that. I didn't confront them immediately. Something told me to keep this discovery to myself, at least until I could process what it meant. Instead, I continued helping them move, all while questioning everything I thought I knew about my family. Around the same time, I began noticing comments from extended family members about how much I resembled my maternal grandfather, Thomas Mitchell. This was biologically impossible, of course, but I did share his love of music, his business acumen, and apparently, his appearance. My grandfather had passed away when I was 17, but we had been close. He'd come to my piano recitals when my parents wouldn't. He'd encouraged my interest in business when my father dismissed it as unbecoming of a young lady. I began to wonder if there was more to my relationship with my grandfather than I'd been told. Was there perhaps a reason I was treated as an afterthought in the family? Was there something about my inheritance, or lack thereof, that I didn't know? These questions would soon find answers in the most unexpected way. My cousin Megan's wedding was held at our family lake house last June. It was a picture-perfect venue. Manicured lawns sloping down to the water, white tents glowing with string lights, flowers everywhere. I'd spent weeks preparing for it, finding the perfect dress, selecting a thoughtful gift, even practicing what to say in the family photos. You see, I was still playing the role of perfect daughter, still hoping that somehow, someday, I'd finally be enough. The ceremony was beautiful, but I felt the familiar strain as soon as we gathered for the reception. Aunt Sandra, my mother's sister, approached me at the bar, champagne in hand. "You look more like your grandfather every year," she said, studying my face. "It's remarkable, really. He would have been proud of what you've done with the firm." "Thank you," I replied, unsure what to make of her comment given what I now knew about my adoption. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Have you ever asked about his estate? The vineyard? It's just, there were always rumors." Before she could finish, my mother appeared, practically dragging Aunt Sandra away to meet some distant relative. The exchange left me unsettled, but I didn't have long to dwell on it. Kevin made his entrance then, fashionably late as always, with a stunning blonde on his arm, his third girlfriend this year. My parents immediately gravitated toward him, my father slapping him on the back, my mother fussing over his tie, both of them cooing over the new girlfriend whose name they'd forget by next month. I hung back, watching the familiar scene play out. I'd learned long ago that inserting myself into these moments only led to awkward silence or subtle dismissals. Instead, I wandered through the reception, making small talk with relatives who seemed equally uncomfortable around me, as if my second-class status in the family was contagious. As the evening progressed, I found myself needing a moment alone and slipped into the lake house to use the bathroom. That's when I heard them. My parents and Kevin, their voices carrying from the study across the hall. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but then I heard my name. "Rebecca's portion of the inheritance is becoming problematic," my father was saying. "With the firm's current valuation, we'd have to liquidate assets I'd rather keep in the family." "Does she really need to inherit anything?" Kevin asked. "It's not like she's contributed anything meaningful. I'm the one with the vision for expansion." I froze, unable to believe what I was hearing. Kevin, who had never successfully run anything, was talking about his vision for the firm I'd helped build for the last decade. "We're thinking the same thing," my father replied. "In fact, we're already talking to buyers. The Anderson Group is interested." "What about Rebecca?" my mother asked, her tone suggesting mild concern. "She's put her whole life into the firm." There was a pause, and then my father's voice, cold and definitive, "In our eyes, she's already dead. She's not family, not really. She was an obligation we fulfilled. Now it's time to focus on our actual family." My mother sighed. "I suppose you're right. It's just, appearances, you know." Kevin laughed. "Who cares about appearances? Let's stop pretending she matters. She's been riding on our family name her whole life." I stood there, champagne glass in hand, feeling like I'd been physically struck. The glass nearly slipped from my fingers as I processed their words. My stomach churned, my vision blurred, and I thought I might be sick right there in the hallway. Somehow I made it to the bathroom, locking the door behind me before collapsing onto the cool tile floor. 32 years of trying to earn love that was never going to be given. 32 years of comparison, of never measuring up, of being the outsider without knowing why. As I sat there, something shifted inside me. The pain was still there, raw and throbbing, but alongside it grew something else, resolve. I was done trying to be the perfect daughter. I was done seeking approval from people who had already written me off. I was done pretending. I splashed water on my face, reapplied my lipstick, and walked out with my head high. No tearful confrontation, no scene at my cousin's wedding. I simply made my excuses, claiming a migraine, and left early. No one seemed particularly concerned by my departure. That night, as I drove away from the lake house, I felt like I was attending my own funeral. The Rebecca who had desperately sought her parents' approval was dead. But something new was being born in her place, someone stronger, someone who would no longer accept less than she deserved. Little did my family know that their dead daughter was about to rise from the ashes, and nothing would ever be the same. My quest began the Monday after the wedding. I took a personal day from work, something I rarely did, and made an appointment with Walter Jenkins, our family's longtime lawyer. Walter had always been kind to me, even when my father was dismissive. He was in his 70s now, semi-retired but still handling select clients, including my grandfather's estate. "Rebecca," he said, genuinely pleased to see me as I entered his wood-paneled office. "What a nice surprise. How are you?" "I've been better, Walter," I admitted. "I recently learned I was adopted." His eyes widened slightly, but he didn't seem completely shocked. "I see. And your parents told you this?" "No. I found the papers while helping them move. They never planned to tell me." Walter sighed, removing his glasses to clean them, a habit when he was thinking. "I always told Thomas, your grandfather, that secrets have a way of surfacing. Particularly in families. That's partly why I'm here," I said carefully. "At the wedding, I overheard some concerning conversations about the family firm and my inheritance. Or lack thereof." Walter's expression darkened. "What exactly did you hear?" I told him everything, the plans to sell the firm without telling me, the cruel words about me being already dead to them. As I spoke, Walter's face grew increasingly troubled. "This is disturbing, but not entirely surprising," he said finally. "Your grandfather never fully trusted your father's judgment, especially regarding you." "What do you mean?" I asked. Walter hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. He walked to a wall safe hidden behind a painting, entered the combination, and removed a thick folder. "Thomas Mitchell was a shrewd businessman and an excellent judge of character," Walter explained, returning to his desk. "He loved you very much, Rebecca. He also suspected that your father might not honor his wishes regarding your inheritance." He opened the folder, revealing legal documents and letters. "Your grandfather established a separate trust for you, with very specific conditions. I'm the trustee, and I've been waiting for you to come asking about it." My hands trembled as I accepted the papers. The trust contained investments, property, and most surprisingly, full ownership of Mitchell Vineyards, a property adjacent to the family lake house that I'd always thought was sold after my grandfather's death. "Why didn't anyone tell me about this?" I whispered. "The trust stipulated that you would be informed on your 33rd birthday, unless certain conditions arose earlier, such as the firm being sold without your knowledge or consent." "Why would he set it up this way?" Walter smiled sadly. "Thomas knew your father well. He wanted to protect you, but he also wanted to give your father a chance to do the right thing on his own. Clearly, he hasn't. The trust was worth millions, far more than my share of the family firm would have been. My grandfather had quietly built an empire while my father had merely maintained what he inherited." Armed with this knowledge, I began a methodical investigation. My position at the firm gave me access to financial records that revealed troubling patterns. My father and Kevin had been siphoning company assets for years, using creative accounting to hide their tracks. They'd also been systematically minimizing my contributions while documenting their own inflated roles. I also discovered that my biological parents hadn't been distant family friends as the adoption papers suggested. They were actually close cousins of my grandfather, which explained my resemblance to him. After they died, he had arranged my adoption to his son, hoping to keep me in the family. He had loved me not out of obligation but because I was, in fact, his blood relative. My next stop was Aunt Sandra, who had tried to warn me at the wedding. I invited her to lunch at a discreet restaurant far from our usual family haunts. "I've been waiting for you to reach out," she said as soon as we were seated. "After I saw your face at the wedding, I knew you'd overheard something." "I know about the adoption," I told her. "And about grandfather's trust." She nodded, guilt flashing across her face. "I should have told you years ago. Your father swore the family to secrecy, claimed it would only hurt you to know. I went along with it because I thought it might be true, but watching how they've treated you all these years." She reached for my hand. "I'm so sorry, Rebecca. Did you know they're planning to sell the firm?" I asked. "Yes. Richard Anderson has been meeting with your father for months. They're just waiting for the right moment to announce it." I felt oddly calm as pieces continued falling into place. "And Kevin? Is he aware of everything?" "Kevin has always known you were adopted. They told him when he was 12, warned him not to tell you. He's held it over your head for years, using it to secure his position as the real heir." The betrayal cut deep, but it also clarified my path forward. That evening, I returned to my apartment and found a small lockbox I'd brought from my parents' house, items my mother had asked me to store during their move. Inside were letters my grandfather had written to me but never sent, saved by my mother for reasons I couldn't fathom. "My dearest Rebecca," one began, "you remind me so much of your father, your real father, my cousin James. He had your same talent for music, your same kind heart. I've watched your parents push you away from these gifts, and it breaks my heart. But know this, I've arranged things so that one day, justice will come. The vineyard that James loved will be yours, along with the means to live life on your own terms. Be patient. Be strong. The truth has a way of surfacing, like the best wines when they're ready." Tears streamed down my face as I read letter after letter. Years of love and concern that had never reached me. But they were reaching me now, and they gave me the strength for what I needed to do next. I didn't rush into action. If my parents had taught me anything useful, it was the value of careful planning. The day after meeting with Walter, I hired Elizabeth Davidson, a top-tier lawyer specializing in estate fraud and corporate malfeasance. "We need to document everything," she advised during our first meeting. "Every instance of financial mismanagement, every conversation about cutting you out, every action that breaches fiduciary duty." For the next month, I continued working at the firm as if nothing had changed. I maintained the perfect daughter facade while methodically gathering evidence. I copied financial records, recorded conversations when legally permitted, and created a detailed timeline of my father and Kevin's questionable business decisions. When I had enough preliminary evidence, I scheduled a meeting with my parents. "I've been thinking about making some changes," I told them over dinner at their house. "I might want to take some time off, do some traveling." The relief on their faces was immediate and unmistakable. "That sounds wonderful, dear," my mother said, not quite meeting my eyes. "You've been working so hard." "Everyone needs a break sometimes," my father added, already mentally calculating how my absence would make their plans easier. "I might be gone for quite a while," I continued. "I'd need to reduce my role at the firm." "Don't worry about that," my father said quickly. "Kevin can step up. He's been wanting more responsibility." I nodded, playing along. "I thought he might. Just to be clear, though, what happens to my position if I decide to come back?" My father's smile tightened. "Well, let's cross that bridge when we come to it. Business structures evolve, you know." "Of course," I replied, raising my wine glass. "To evolution, then." After submitting my formal request for extended leave, I began the real work. I met secretly with Marcus Chen, a forensic accountant recommended by Elizabeth. Together, we traced the money trail of every suspicious transaction at Mitchell Financial over the past decade. Your father and brother have been playing fast and loose with client funds, Marcus explained, pointing to a complex web of transactions on his laptop. They've been using the firm as their personal piggy bank, and they've hidden it well, but not well enough. We documented tax evasion, client fund misappropriation, and numerous breaches of fiduciary duty. Meanwhile, Elizabeth arranged meetings with Judge Harold Williams, an old friend of my grandfather's who still held considerable influence in local legal circles. Your grandfather was one of the most honest businessmen I ever knew, Judge Williams told me over coffee. It pains me to hear how his legacy is being tarnished. I can't interfere directly, of course, but I can point you toward the proper legal channels. With his guidance, we built an airtight case. At the same time, I began quietly establishing my own financial consulting firm, reaching out to clients I knew were dissatisfied with my father's service. I was careful to avoid direct solicitation, instead positioning myself as a concerned professional checking in. While all this was happening in secret, I was also making my most visible move, purchasing and restoring my grandfather's beloved vineyard estate. The property had been leased out after his death, the vines neglected, the elegant main house fallen into disrepair. Using funds from the trust, I began bringing it back to life. I hired Sophia Martinez, who had managed the vineyard under my grandfather, to oversee its restoration. Your grandfather would be so happy to see you here, she told me on her first day back. He always said this place should have been yours. The vineyard sat on a hill overlooking the family lake house. From the main terrace, you could see my parents' property clearly. They, in turn, would soon be able to see the lights of the vineyard coming back to life, a constant reminder of what they had tried to keep from me. As spring turned to summer, my plan continued to unfold. There were moments of doubt, nights when I woke up in cold sweats wondering if I was going too far. Was revenge worth all this effort? Was I becoming as calculating as my father? During one particularly difficult week, I began having panic attacks. Elizabeth noticed during a strategy meeting and recommended her own therapist, Dr. Leena Patel. Revenge is a natural response to betrayal, Dr. Patel told me during our first session. But it's important to distinguish between justice and vengeance. One heals, the other perpetuates pain. Her words stayed with me as I continued my preparations. This wasn't just about hurting my family as they had hurt me. It was about truth, about consequences for actions, about reclaiming my life and my grandfather's legacy. The final piece fell into place when I met Marcus for dinner at a quiet restaurant to review some documents. What started as a professional relationship had gradually evolved into something more. He understood my pain in a way few could. His own family had disowned him when he chose accounting over joining the family restaurant business. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" he asked as we finished our meal. "Once you make your move, there's no going back." I looked into his concerned eyes and felt, for perhaps the first time, truly seen. "I'm sure," I said. "Not because I want to hurt them, but because the truth deserves to be known. I deserve to be known." He reached across the table and took my hand. "Then I'm with you, whatever happens." That night, I finalized the invitations to the vineyard's grand opening celebration, scheduled exactly 1 year after the wedding where I'd overheard those devastating words. Every family member would be invited, along with key business associates and friends. It would be the perfect setting for the truth to finally come to light. I have to admit, as I sit here working on this plan that's been my focus for months now, there are moments when I wonder if you've ever faced something similar. Have you ever had to stand up to family who treated you like you didn't matter? The journey from people-pleaser to standing your ground is incredibly hard, but so necessary. If you're in the middle of that journey yourself, know you're not alone. Let me know in the comments if this story is resonating with you so far. I read every single one. Now, let's continue with what happened when those invitations hit my family's mailbox. While my revenge plan was taking shape in the background, I was simultaneously building something far more meaningful, a new life based on my own terms. The vineyard estate became the center of this transformation. The property needed extensive work. Years of neglectful management had left the vines struggling and the main house in disrepair. I threw myself into its restoration, working alongside the crews, learning everything I could about viticulture and winemaking. Sofia Martinez was invaluable, introducing me to industry experts and sharing the techniques my grandfather had pioneered. He was ahead of his time, she explained as we walked the rows of grapevines one morning. He believed in sustainable farming long before it was trendy. These vines struggled under the corporate management after he died, but they have strong roots. Like you, I think. Within months, the estate began to transform. The elegant Victorian main house was restored to its former glory, with modern updates that respected its history. We replanted damaged sections of the vineyard with varietals my grandfather had loved, and built a state-of-the-art production facility that would make Mitchell Vineyards competitive in the modern wine market. More importantly, I was transforming too. For the first time since childhood, I reconnected with music. I converted one of the estate's outbuildings into a music studio and began playing piano again, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. Sometimes I'd play late into the night, the melodies floating across the vineyard, occasionally carrying as far as the lake house where my parents lived. I wondered if they ever heard it, if they ever recognized the Chopin nocturnes their dead daughter was bringing back to life. While my personal life flourished, I was also laying the groundwork for my professional independence. Mitchell Financial Consulting, my new firm, was gaining clients steadily. Many of them former clients of my father's who had grown dissatisfied with his increasingly erratic business practices. I never directly solicited these clients, I didn't need to. Word spread through business circles that I was establishing my own practice, and people came to me. My approach, more ethical, more transparent, more client-focused than my father's, quickly earned me a reputation as someone who could be trusted. This success didn't go unnoticed. Through Aunt Sandra, who had become my ally, I learned that my father's firm was beginning to struggle without my expertise. "Your father's in a panic," she told me during one of her secret visits to the vineyard. 3 of his biggest clients left last month. Kevin's trying to step up, but he's making a mess of things. They're starting to realize how much they relied on you. And the Anderson deal? I asked. Stalled. Richard Anderson's having second thoughts after reviewing the firm's recent performance. Without you managing the accounts, the numbers don't look nearly as attractive. I took no pleasure in their struggles, well, perhaps a little, but I remained focused on building rather than destroying. Every decision I made for my new business emphasized integrity and long-term relationships over quick profits. It was the approach my grandfather had always advocated, the approach my father had abandoned. My personal life was changing too. My friendship with Marcus had deepened into romance, something neither of us had expected. He understood my story in a way few could, the complexity of family betrayal, the courage it takes to walk away from toxic relationships, the challenge of building something new from the ashes of the old. My parents still send me guilt-laden messages every holiday, he told me one evening as we sat on the vineyard terrace, watching the sunset. It took me years to stop automatically reaching for my phone to respond, to stop feeling like I owed them an explanation for living my own life. Does it ever get easier? I asked. He considered the question carefully. It doesn't get easier, exactly. You just get stronger. The guilt loses its power over you. As summer turned to fall, and fall to winter, I felt that strength growing in me. The panic attacks became less frequent. The nightmares where I confronted my family only to find myself voiceless began to fade. The woman who looked back at me from the mirror each morning was becoming someone I barely recognized, confident, purposeful, unwilling to accept less than she deserved. The vineyard's first small harvest came in October. We wouldn't be producing much wine from it, the vines needed more time to recover fully, but Sophia insisted we create at least one special vintage to mark the estate's rebirth. Your grandfather always celebrated new beginnings, she said as we watched the first grapes being pressed. He would want us to honor this one. We decided to call this inaugural wine Phoenix, a nod to rising from the ashes. I planned to serve it at the grand opening celebration, a symbol of transformation that few guests would fully understand. As winter settled over the vineyard, bringing quiet days perfect for planning and reflection, I received increasingly frequent messages from my mother. Casual texts asking how I was doing. Voicemails suggesting lunch to catch up. Social media comments that implied nothing was wrong between us. I responded politely but distantly, maintaining the boundaries I'd established. Kevin was less subtle. His messages oscillated between angry demands to know what I was doing with his clients and awkward attempts at reconciliation, usually when he needed something. I saved every communication as evidence, responding only when necessary and always professionally. My father, predictably, said nothing. His pride wouldn't allow him to reach out, even as his business crumbled. Through Walter, I learned that he'd been forced to take out loans to cover operating expenses. Something that had never happened while I was managing the firm's finances. As January arrived and preparations for the vineyard's grand opening intensified, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger that had initially fueled my plans had transformed into something more measured, more purposeful. This wasn't about hurting my family anymore, it was about standing in my truth and letting the consequences fall where they may. On a snowy evening in early February, I sat at my grandfather's restored grand piano, playing one of his favorite pieces, Debussy's Clair de Lune. As the delicate notes filled the room, I thought about how far I'd come from that devastated woman hiding in a bathroom at her cousin's wedding. I wasn't dead after all, I was more alive than I'd ever been. In early March, exactly 1 month before the planned grand opening, I sent out the invitations. They were elegant affairs, heavy cream cardstock with gold lettering announcing the rebirth of Mitchell Vineyards under new ownership. My name was prominently featured, along with a small line acknowledging my grandfather's legacy. I handwrote personal notes on each one, including those addressed to my parents and Kevin. On my parents' invitation, I simply wrote, "I hope you'll join me for this special occasion." The view from the estate to the lake house is particularly beautiful at sunset. It was just enough to make them wonder what I knew, what I had discovered during my time away. I imagined them receiving it, reading that cryptic note, realizing that the mysterious construction they'd been seeing across the lake was connected to their estranged daughter. I didn't have to imagine for long. Within hours of the invitations being delivered, my phone began buzzing with notifications. First came a confused text from my mother, "Mitchell Vineyards? Rebecca, what is this about?" I didn't respond immediately, letting the uncertainty linger. Kevin called next, leaving a rambling voicemail. "Hey sis, got your fancy invitation. Didn't know you were into wine now. Is this some kind of joke? Call me back." Again, I let silence speak for me. My father, predictably, was the last to reach out. When he finally called that evening, I let it go to voicemail. "Rebecca, this is your father." His voice was stiff, controlled. "We need to discuss this vineyard situation immediately. Call me back tonight." It wasn't a request, it was a command, the same authoritative tone he'd used throughout my childhood. But I was no longer the obedient daughter desperate for his approval. I waited until the next morning to respond, sending a brief text, "Looking forward to seeing you at the opening. All will be explained then." The next few weeks brought escalating attempts at contact. My mother called daily, her messages growing increasingly anxious. Kevin oscillated between threats and awkward attempts at camaraderie. My father's calls became more demanding, then oddly conciliatory, then threatening again. Through family channels, I learned they were scrambling to understand what was happening. They'd discovered that Mitchell Vineyards had indeed been purchased by an LLC, one they couldn't trace back to me directly. They were confused about how I could afford such an acquisition, where I'd gotten the expertise to run a vineyard, and most importantly, what connection this had to my grandfather. Aunt Sandra called to warn me that they'd been questioning her and other family members. "Your father is in a state I've never seen before," she said. "He's always been so controlled, but he actually shouted at your mother yesterday when she suggested they should just ask you directly what's going on." "And Kevin?" I asked. Panicking. "He's convinced this somehow threatens his inheritance. He keeps saying there must be some mistake, that the vineyard was sold years ago." Word of the mysterious vineyard restoration and upcoming grand opening spread quickly through our extended family and social circles. The timing, exactly 1 year after my cousin's wedding, didn't go unnoticed. Speculation ran rampant, with theories ranging from a sudden windfall to a wealthy secret boyfriend. No one guessed the truth, because no one knew about my grandfather's trust or my discovery of the adoption papers. My parents had kept those secrets too well for too long. As the opening approached, I met with Elizabeth and Marcus to review our strategy one last time. All the documentation is in order, Elizabeth confirmed. We have copies of everything ready to distribute if necessary, though I'm hoping it won't come to that. Ideally, your father will see the evidence we have and agree to a private resolution. And if he doesn't? I asked. Then we're prepared for the next steps. The authorities have already been briefed on potential financial irregularities at Mitchell Financial. They're waiting for our signal. Marcus squeezed my hand reassuringly. Remember, this is about justice, not revenge. We're exposing the truth that's been hidden for decades. 1 week before the opening, I received a surprise visit at the vineyard. I was working in the office when Sophia announced that my mother was at the door. She's alone, Sophia added. Should I send her away? After a moment's consideration, I shook my head. No, I'll see her. In the front parlor, please. My mother looked smaller somehow, less imposing than the woman who had intimidated me my entire life. She stood awkwardly in the center of the room, taking in the restored grandeur of my grandfather's home. This place looks just like it did when Thomas was alive, she said quietly. He loved it here. Yes, he did, I replied, keeping my distance. Why are you here, Mother? She fidgeted with her purse strap. We're concerned about you, Rebecca. This sudden project. It seems so unlike you. Does it? Or is it just unlike the person you wanted me to be? Her eyes widened slightly. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. I know everything, Mother. About my adoption. About grandfather's trust. About the plans to sell the firm without telling me. The color drained from her face. How did you? It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that I do know, and in 10 days, everyone else will too. She took a step toward me, her voice dropping to a whisper. Rebecca, please. Whatever you're planning, don't do this. Think of the family. That's exactly what I am thinking of, I replied calmly. The family that decided I was already dead to them. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. You heard that? At the wedding? Every word. She sank onto a nearby chair, suddenly looking every one of her 65 years. Your father didn't mean it literally. He was just upset about the firm's finances and... Stop. My voice was gentle but firm. No more lies, Mother. Not now. She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. What do you want? Money? A formal apology? I want the truth to be known. I want what's rightfully mine. And I want the three of you to experience just a fraction of the pain you've caused me my entire life. And after that? What then? I hadn't expected this question, and it gave me pause. What did I want after the confrontation? After the truth was revealed? After that, we'll see, I said finally. It depends on what happens at the opening. She left soon after, with no promises made on either side. As I watched her car disappear down the vineyard's long driveway, I felt oddly peaceful. The die was cast now. In 10 days, everything would change. The RSVP list for the opening grew daily. Every family member had confirmed their attendance, along with business associates, wine industry figures, and local dignitaries. Judge Williams would be there, as would Walter Jenkins and several of my father's former clients. It would be the perfect audience for the truth to finally emerge. The night before the opening, I stood on the vineyard's main terrace, looking out over the valley toward the lake house where my parents lived. Lights glowed in the windows, and I imagined them there, perhaps arguing about how to handle tomorrow's event, perhaps plotting some counter-strategy. Marcus joined me, wrapping a warm jacket around my shoulders against the early spring chill. "Second thoughts?" he asked quietly. I considered the question carefully. "Not about revealing the truth. But I've been thinking about what comes after." My mother asked me the same thing. "And what did you tell her?" "That it depends on what happens tomorrow. On whether they can finally be honest, with me and with themselves." He nodded, understanding. "Either way, you'll be okay. You've built something beautiful here, Rebecca. Something that's truly yours." As we stood there in comfortable silence, I realized he was right. Whatever happened tomorrow, I had already won the most important victory. I had reclaimed my life, my truth, my worth. Everything else was just details. April 15th dawned clear and perfect, as if even the weather was cooperating with my plans. The vineyard looked spectacular, flowering trees in full bloom, new leaves unfurling on the grapevines, the restored Victorian mansion gleaming in the spring sunlight. Staff in crisp uniforms made final preparations while I retreated to my suite to get ready. I chose my outfit carefully, an elegant emerald dress that subtly echoed the one my grandfather wore in the portrait hanging in the main hall, paired with his mother's emerald earrings from the collection he'd left me. My hair, usually pulled back in a practical style for work, fell in loose waves around my shoulders. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. There was a confidence, a presence I'd never possessed before. "You look stunning," Marcus said when he came to escort me downstairs. He was handsome in his tailored suit, the perfect partner for what was about to unfold. Guests began arriving at 4, starting with business associates and vineyard neighbors. Walter Jenkins came early, as planned, bringing the final documents we might need. Judge Williams arrived shortly after, his presence lending gravitas to the occasion. "Everything is in place," Elizabeth whispered as she joined us in greeting guests. "The presentation is ready, security is briefed, and I have officers on standby if needed." By 5, the party was in full swing. The grand ballroom of the mansion filled with conversation and laughter as servers circulated with hors d'oeuvres and glasses of wine, not our own yet, but carefully selected vintages that complemented what Mitchell Vineyards would eventually produce. Extended family members arrived in groups, curious and excited about the mysterious renovation that had been the subject of so much speculation. Aunt Sandra gave me a knowing smile and a warm hug. Cousin Megan, at whose wedding this journey had begun, complimented the estate effusively, blissfully unaware of the drama about to unfold. At 5:30, I received word that my parents and Kevin had arrived. They came in as a unit, heads high, smiles fixed firmly in place, the picture of family solidarity. My mother wore an expensive new dress, my father his best suit. Kevin looked uncomfortable and formal where he rarely donned. I watched them from across the room as they took in the magnificence of what I'd created, noted the important people in attendance, realized the scale of what was happening. My father's expression remained carefully neutral, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. My mother seemed nervous, glancing around as if expecting a trap. Kevin looked sullen and confused. I gave them time to get drinks, to circulate awkwardly as guests asked them about the vineyard they clearly knew nothing about. At precisely 6 o'clock, I nodded to the staff, who gently guided everyone to the main terrace for the official welcome. A microphone had been set up at one end of the terrace, with the spectacular valley view as backdrop. The lake house was visible in the distance, a pointed reminder of the connections between past and present. As I stepped up to speak, a hush fell over the crowd. "Welcome, everyone, to the rebirth of Mitchell Vineyards," I began, my voice steady and clear. "Many of you have been wondering how this came to be, why the invitation came from me, and what connection this beautiful estate has to our family history. Today, I'm going to share that story with you." I saw my father tense, my mother's hand gripping her champagne glass too tightly. This vineyard was my grandfather Thomas Mitchell's pride and joy. Many of you knew him as a brilliant businessman, but his true passion was here, among these vines. When he passed away 15 years ago, most of you were told that this property was sold to investors. That was not the truth. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. My father took a half step forward, then seemed to think better of it. The truth, which I discovered only last year, is that my grandfather left this vineyard to me in a separate trust, along with significant other assets. He did this because he suspected that after his death, I might not be treated fairly by those managing his estate. I paused, letting the implications sink in. Many eyes turned toward my father, confusion evident. At the same time, I also discovered something else that had been hidden from me my entire life, the fact that I was adopted. Gasps echoed across the terrace. My mother closed her eyes briefly, her worst fear realized. My biological parents were actually my grandfather's cousins, who died in a car accident when I was an infant. This explained the family resemblance many of you have commented on over the years. It also explained something else that had always puzzled me, why I was treated differently from my brother Kevin, why my achievements were minimized while his were celebrated. Kevin's face flushed red with anger or embarrassment, perhaps both. I might never have learned any of this if not for a conversation I overheard at Megan's wedding exactly 1 year ago today. I turned to smile at my cousin, who looked shocked. Sorry to bring this up at your anniversary, Megan. I promise it gets better. A nervous chuckle ran through the crowd, breaking the tension momentarily. At that wedding, I overheard my father say to my mother and brother, and I quote, "In our eyes, she's already dead." They were discussing writing me out of the family inheritance completely, selling the firm I had helped build without my knowledge, and, in essence, erasing me from the family narrative. All eyes turned to my parents, who stood frozen in place, the perfect family facade crumbling before everyone's eyes. For 32 years, I tried to earn the love and approval that should have been freely given. I sacrificed my own dreams, worked tirelessly for the family business, and accepted being treated as less than. But in that moment, hearing those cruel words, something changed in me. I decided that if I was dead to them, then the perfect daughter they had controlled would indeed be gone forever. I gestured to Walter, who stepped forward with a remote control. A screen descended at the end of the terrace, and a presentation began, images of my grandfather, the vineyard in its heyday, and documents showing the trust's existence and terms. My grandfather's foresight and love protected me when others would not. This vineyard, this home, and substantial other assets were left to me directly, with Walter Jenkins as trustee until I claimed my inheritance. Which I have now done. The presentation continued, showing evidence of my father and Kevin's financial mismanagement, the steady decline of the firm after I left, and documentation of questionable business practices that bordered on illegal. In the process of claiming my inheritance, I also discovered disturbing information about how the family firm has been managed in recent years. This documentation has been shared with appropriate authorities, who are conducting their own investigation. My father finally found his voice. This is preposterous. Rebecca, stop this immediately. His face had turned an alarming shade of red. Is it preposterous, father? Or is it simply inconvenient? Would you like me to share the recorded conversation where you and Kevin discussed liquidating client investment accounts to cover personal expenses? Or perhaps the emails about falsifying profit reports? He fell silent, the threat clear. My mother stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Rebecca, please. We can discuss this privately. As a family. We are not a family, I replied, my voice gentle but firm. You made that abundantly clear a year ago. You cannot declare someone dead and then expect them to keep your secrets. At that moment, Aunt Sandra stepped forward. What Rebecca is saying is true. I've known about the adoption since it happened, and I've watched how she's been treated all these years. Thomas would be ashamed of what you've done with his legacy, Richard. Other family members began murmuring, pieces of long-standing family puzzles finally falling into place. Kevin, seeing the tide turning, attempted damage control. Look, there's clearly been some misunderstanding. Rebecca's obviously been under a lot of stress, imagining slights where none existed. We've always loved her. This is just. Save it, Kevin, I interrupted. The evidence speaks for itself. And speaking of evidence. I nodded to Elizabeth, who distributed folders to key individuals in the crowd, Judge Williams, family attorney Walter Jenkins, and representatives from the State Business Regulatory Board who had been quietly invited. These contained documentation of every questionable transaction at Mitchell Financial for the past 10 years. I'm not asking for anyone to take my word for it, the numbers tell the story themselves. As the implications of what was happening dawned on my father, he made one last desperate attempt to regain control. This is blackmail. She's threatening us to extract money. Judge Williams stepped forward then, his authoritative presence silencing the crowd. Having reviewed these documents, I can assure you that Ms. Mitchell is simply presenting evidence of potential financial improprieties. If anything, she's showing remarkable restraint. With my father effectively neutralized, I continued. I didn't arrange this gathering for revenge, though I won't pretend the thought didn't cross my mind. I did it because secrets and lies have damaged our family for too long. The truth needed to come to light, not just for me, but for everyone who has been deceived. I raised my glass, signaling to the servers to distribute the special vintage we'd prepared. Now, I invite you all to be the first to taste Phoenix, the inaugural wine from the reborn Mitchell vineyards. Like its namesake, this estate has risen from the ashes, transformed but carrying the legacy of what came before. As glasses were distributed, I concluded simply, to truth, to new beginnings, and to the family we choose rather than the one we're born into. The crowd raised their glasses, many eyes still wide with shock at what they'd witnessed. My parents and Kevin stood isolated in a growing circle of empty space as guests subtly distanced themselves from the family disgrace. As I stepped down from the microphone, Marcus took my hand, squeezing it in silent support. Across the terrace, I saw two plainclothes officers quietly approaching my father, official-looking documents in hand. The confrontation I'd planned for a year was over, and I felt not triumph but a strange, peaceful emptiness, like the calm after a devastating storm. Whatever happened next, the truth was finally known. The dead had indeed returned, and nothing would ever be the same. The days following the revelation party unfolded like scenes from a movie I was watching rather than living. My father and Kevin were served with formal notices of investigation into their business practices right there on the terrace. No handcuffs or dramatic arrests, just the quiet delivery of documents that represented the beginning of the end for Mitchell Financial Services. As guests dispersed in a cloud of shocked whispers and hurried phone calls, my father made one last attempt to regain control of the situation. He cornered me in the mansion's library, away from the remaining guests. "Name your price," he said without preamble, his voice tight with barely contained fury. "Whatever you think you're owed, I'll pay it. But this ends now, and these ridiculous allegations are withdrawn." I regarded him calmly, noting how small he suddenly seemed, not the towering figure of my childhood but just a man, flawed and desperate. "There is no price, Father. This isn't a negotiation, it's a consequence. Do you have any idea what you've done?" His voice rose slightly. 30 years of building a reputation, a legacy, you've destroyed it in one night out of spite. You destroyed it yourself, with every corner cut, every client deceived, every time you chose greed over integrity. And it wasn't spite that brought us here, it was your own words. In our eyes, she's already dead. Remember? The color drained from his face. That was. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. That's the problem, Father. You meant every word. He left soon after, my mother trailing behind him, her mascara streaked with tears, her perfect appearance finally cracked. Kevin stormed out separately, already distancing himself from our parents, looking for an angle to save himself. The media picked up the story within days, not national headlines, but significant coverage in local business circles and industry publications. Mitchell Financial under investigation, family firm scandal rocks local business community, vineyard unveiling reveals family secrets. My carefully constructed narrative about rediscovering my grandfather's legacy dominated the coverage, with the financial improprieties presented as an unfortunate sidebar rather than the main story. I had no interest in publicly humiliating my family beyond what was necessary for justice. Elizabeth had helped craft a statement that was factual but restrained, focusing on the positive aspects of reclaiming my grandfather's legacy rather than my parents' betrayal. Business associates and clients quickly distanced themselves from Mitchell Financial. Within 2 weeks, the firm had lost over 60% of its client base, many coming directly to my new company. The exodus was so complete that my father was forced to downsize the office and lay off staff just to keep the doors open. My mother began calling daily, her messages evolving from angry accusations to tearful pleas for reconciliation. I didn't block her number, but I didn't respond either. I needed time to process everything, to decide what, if any, relationship I wanted with her going forward. One rainy afternoon in May, about 3 weeks after the revelation, she appeared at the vineyard unannounced. Sophia showed her into my office, where I was reviewing plans for the summer growing season. "I've left your father," she said without preamble, standing awkwardly just inside the door. I gestured to a chair, which she took hesitantly. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it despite everything. "No, you're not." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "And you shouldn't be. It was long overdue." We sat in silence for a moment, 32 years of unspoken truths hanging between us. "I started therapy," she continued finally. "The therapist says I've been enabling Richard's behavior for decades, that I failed you as a mother by not standing up for you." She twisted her hands in her lap. "She's right, of course. Why did you do it?" I asked the question that had haunted me for months. "Why treat me differently because I was adopted?" She sighed deeply. "It wasn't conscious, at least not at first. When we adopted you, I thought we would love you the same as any biological child. But when Kevin was born 2 years later, Richard just fixated on him. He was the son, the blood heir. And instead of challenging that, I went along with it. It was easier." "Easier than what?" "Then admitting we were wrong. Then facing Richard's disapproval. Then standing up to him." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I don't expect forgiveness, Rebecca. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand what we did to you, and I am profoundly sorry." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to embrace her, to find some way back to the mother-daughter relationship I'd always craved. Another part remained wary, suspicious of this sudden change of heart. "I need time," I said finally. "This doesn't erase 32 years. She nodded, rising to leave. "I understand. For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've built here. Your grandfather would be too." As spring turned to summer, the legal proceedings against my father and Kevin advanced steadily. The evidence was too substantial to dismiss, but their legal team managed to negotiate a plea deal that avoided a public trial. My father would serve 18 months in a minimum security facility, while Kevin received 12 months and probation. The terms included significant financial restitution to defrauded clients and the permanent revocation of their licenses to practice financial management. The family firm was dissolved, its remaining assets sold to cover debts and settlements. The lake house, which had been in the family for generations, went on the market. I could have bought it, I certainly had the means now, but some chapters needed to close completely. Extended family members chose sides, as families always do in such situations. Some avoided me entirely, viewing me as the villain who had destroyed the family. Others reached out, often awkwardly, to establish relationships independent of my parents. Aunt Sandra became a regular visitor to the vineyard, bringing family stories and photographs I'd never seen before. "Your grandfather kept these for you," she explained, showing me albums of my biological parents. "He wanted you to know them when you were ready." Through these photos and stories, I began piecing together the history that had been kept from me, my father's musical talent that I had inherited, my mother's intelligence and determination, their love story cut tragically short. It didn't erase the pain of my childhood, but it provided context, connections, roots I had never known I had. Marcus remained steadfastly by my side through all of this, neither pushing me to reconcile with my family nor encouraging me to cut them off completely. "This is your journey," he said simply. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. His support, along with regular sessions with Dr. Patel, helped me navigate the complex emotions of the aftermath. There were days when the satisfaction of justice felt hollow, when I questioned whether the revelation had truly healed anything or simply created new wounds. There were nights when I woke up feeling guilty, wondering if I had gone too far. But there were also moments of profound peace, of genuine joy in the new life I was creating, moments that gradually began to outnumber the difficult ones. By midsummer, the vineyard was thriving. The vines were heavy with developing fruit, the winemaking facility was fully operational, and the estate had begun hosting small events that were quickly becoming the most sought-after invitations in the region. Mitchell Vineyards was establishing itself as a premium boutique winery, honoring my grandfather's vision while incorporating modern approaches. More importantly, I was thriving too. The music studio had become my sanctuary, a place where I could reconnect with the passion I had suppressed for so long. I began playing publicly again, hosting small recitals at the vineyard that combined music with wine tastings. My business continued to grow, built on the ethical foundation that had been missing from my father's approach. In August, I received a letter from my father, written from the correctional facility where he was serving his sentence. I let it sit on my desk for 3 days before finally opening it. Rebecca, it began simply. I have had much time to reflect on the events that brought me here. While I cannot change the past, I want you to know that I recognize the role my actions played in destroying our family. The man I became is not the man your grandfather raised me to be, nor the man I once aspired to be. I allowed ambition and pride to corrupt not just my business ethics but my capacity to love my own daughter. For that, I am truly sorry. It wasn't a dramatic plea for forgiveness or a manipulative attempt to re-establish control. It was simply an acknowledgement, the first honest communication we'd had in as long as I could remember. I didn't respond immediately, but I kept the letter, a tangible reminder that even the most entrenched patterns can sometimes, against all odds, begin to change. As summer faded into fall and the vineyard prepared for its first full harvest, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. The woman who had stood frozen behind a decorative screen, champagne glass in hand, hearing herself declared dead to her family, would not recognize the woman I had become, confident, purposeful, whole in a way I had never been before. The revenge I had so carefully planned had brought justice, but it was the reclamation of my own life that had brought healing. I had stopped seeking approval from those who could not or would not give it. I had built connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I had created something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. And in doing so, I had discovered that sometimes, being declared dead is not an ending but a beginning, a chance to rise, phoenix-like, into a new and more authentic life. April sunshine bathed the vineyard in golden light as I stood on the main terrace, watching guests arrive for our first anniversary celebration. The estate had never looked more beautiful, the restored Victorian mansion gleaming, the vineyard rose lush with healthy vines, colorful spring flowers blooming everywhere. In just 1 year, Mitchell Vineyards had established itself as one of the region's premier boutique wineries. Our Phoenix vintage had won unexpected acclaim, and advance orders for our first full production run had exceeded all projections. The business success was gratifying, but it was the personal transformation that marked this day as truly special. "Everything looks perfect," Marcus said, joining me at the terrace railing. He slipped his arm around my waist, his wedding ring catching the sunlight. We had married in a small ceremony on the estate 3 months earlier, surrounded by the people who truly supported and loved us. "Not quite everything," I replied, smoothing my dress over the small but noticeable bump of my pregnancy. At 4 months along, our first child, a boy we planned to name Thomas after my grandfather, was making his presence known. The guest list for today's gathering was smaller and more carefully curated than last year's revelation party. Gone were the business associates and acquaintances who had been invited primarily as witnesses to the truth. Today's celebration was for the family I had chosen and the few blood relatives who had proven themselves worthy of inclusion. Aunt Sandra arrived early, bringing a refurbished music box that had belonged to my biological mother. "I found it in storage," she explained. "It plays Chopin, your father's favorite." Your biological father, I mean. My mother came next, alone and visibly nervous. Our relationship remained complicated, a work in progress. After leaving my father, she had continued with therapy, moved to a small apartment in town, and begun volunteering at a local women's shelter. We had established a cautious, limited connection, monthly lunches, occasional phone calls. Not the closeness I had once desperately wanted, but something honest, at least. Kevin was not invited. After serving his reduced sentence, he had moved to the West Coast, supposedly to start fresh but more likely to escape the cloud of scandal that still lingered over the Mitchell name locally. He occasionally sent awkward text messages, usually when he needed something. I responded politely but maintained firm boundaries. My father, recently released and living in a modest apartment provided by an old friend, had declined my invitation with a respectful note acknowledging it might be too soon. He was right, I wasn't ready to face him in person yet, though our written correspondence had continued, each letter a small step towards something that wasn't quite forgiveness but wasn't quite animosity either. The gathering today included people who had supported me through the past 2 years, Walter Jenkins, who had protected my grandfather's trust, Sophia Martinez, who had helped bring the vineyard back to life, Dr. Patel, whose guidance had been essential to my healing, Elizabeth Davidson, whose legal expertise had ensured justice was served. These people, along with Marcus, had become my chosen family, bound by something stronger than mere blood. As we gathered for lunch in the vineyard's event space, I stood to offer a toast. 1 year ago today, we gathered here for what many of you probably thought would be a dramatic confrontation, the culmination of a carefully planned revenge. Knowing smiles appeared on several faces. And in some ways, it was exactly that. But what I didn't fully understand then was that the most important battle wasn't against my family, but against the narratives I had accepted about myself, that I was less deserving, that I needed to earn love, that my worth was determined by others' assessment. I raised my glass of sparkling cider, my other hand resting on my growing belly. Today we're celebrating something different, not the exposure of lies, but the creation of truth. Not the serving of justice, but the building of joy. Not revenge, but rebirth. After lunch, while guests mingled on the lawn, I slipped away to the music room. The grand piano that had been my grandfather's now stood in pride of place, its rich mahogany gleaming in the afternoon light. I sat down and began to play the piece he had loved most, Bach's Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, letting the music flow through me, connecting past and present, grief and joy, ending and beginning. I was so absorbed in the music that I didn't immediately notice my mother standing in the doorway, listening. When I finished, she approached hesitantly. "You play exactly like him, like your biological father," she said softly. "I should have encouraged it instead of letting Richard push you toward business." "I found my way back to it," I replied, running my fingers lightly over the keys. "That's what matters now." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Rebecca, I know I have no right to ask this, but, will my grandson know me? Will he know I'm his grandmother?" I considered her question carefully. The easy answer would have been yes, a simple forgiveness, a clean slate. But real healing isn't about easy answers. "He'll know you as the person you are now," I said finally. "Not the mother who stood by while I was erased, but the woman who's trying to make amends, who's working to be better. We'll build something new, day by day." "I can't promise more than that." Relief and understanding washed across her face. "That's more than I deserve." "Thank you." Later that evening, as the celebration wound down and the sunset painted the vineyard in shades of gold and crimson, I received an unexpected delivery, a letter from my father, not mailed but hand-delivered by Walter Jenkins. "He asked me to give you this today," Walter explained. "He wanted you to have it on the anniversary, but didn't want to impose his presence." I took the envelope to the terrace to read in private. Inside was a single page, my father's familiar handwriting more careful than I remembered, as if each word had been considered deeply. "Rebecca," it began, "I will not ask for forgiveness I haven't earned. Instead, I write to tell you that I am starting to understand the magnitude of what I lost through my own actions, not just financially or professionally, but the privilege of knowing my daughter, of seeing the remarkable woman you've become despite, not because of, my influence. Thomas was right about you from the beginning. He saw what I was too blind to see, your strength, your integrity, your talent. I convinced myself that business success and family legacy meant maintaining control at all costs. In doing so, I failed to understand that legacy isn't about bloodlines or balance sheets, but about character and choices. You have created something beautiful from the ashes of our family's mistakes. As I work to rebuild my own life from those same ashes, I carry the hope that someday, when you're ready, if you're ever ready, we might find some way to know each other as we truly are, not as who we pretended to be. With profound regret and equally profound respect, your father, Richard Mitchell. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my pocket, neither accepting nor rejecting its tentative olive branch. Time would tell whether this apparent change was genuine, whether any kind of relationship was possible. For now, it was enough to acknowledge that the patterns of generations could indeed be broken, that even the most entrenched family dynamics could transform. Marcus found me there as twilight descended, the vineyard's lights beginning to twinkle on. "Everything okay?" he asked, concerned by my pensive expression. "Yes," I said, realizing that for perhaps the first time in my adult life, it was actually true. "Everything is exactly as it should be." As we walked hand in hand back toward the mansion, I felt a deep sense of peace wash over me. The woman my parents had declared dead had indeed perished, but what had risen in her place was someone far stronger, far more authentic than the perfect daughter I had once pretended to be. Sometimes, I reflected, the greatest gift we can receive is the freedom to stop being who others want us to be and finally discover who we truly are. The journey that had begun with devastating words overheard at a family wedding had led me not just to justice or even to truth, but to something far more precious, a life that was genuinely mine, filled with people who loved me for exactly who I was. And that, I realized, was the most satisfying revenge of all. I hope this story resonated with some of you who faced family betrayal or had to stand up for yourself against people who should have protected you. Family dynamics can be incredibly complex, and sometimes the hardest decisions are the most necessary ones for our growth. Have you ever had to create boundaries with family to protect your own well-being? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story touched you in any way, please hit that like button, it means more than you know. And if you want to hear more family drama and justice-served stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Every story shared helps someone else feel less alone in their journey. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes being written off as dead to toxic family is actually the beginning of your most authentic life. Until next time, take care of yourselves and choose your real family wisely.